Okay, so let's just dive in. If you watch a troop of baboons, moving across the savannah, or you see this huge column of army ants on the jungle floor, it just looks chaotic.
Utterly chaotic.
It
Yeah.
seems like a complete mess of moment-to-moment decisions. But what we're going to talk about today is how, beneath all that, every single interaction, every stare, every scent trail,
Yeah.
it's all the result of some really profound and very precise evolutionary math.
That's the perfect way to put it. We're moving past the big broad strokes of evolutionary theory now, and we're really getting into a deep dive on the design features, you could say, that natural selection has built into societies.
The actual
Right,
mechanisms.
actual social mechanisms, as the source material calls them. This is where we go from the abstract idea of natural selection to the nitty-gritty details, the proximate and the ultimate mechanisms that govern how groups actually work, how they organize, how they talk to each other, reproduce, fight. It's the rule book.
So our mission today feels pretty ambitious. We're not just here to list what animals do. We're trying to decode the algorithms, the quantifiable rules that dictate everything from how big a group can get to why a mother might start rejecting her own baby at weaning.
Right. We're mapping the internal logic. And the one theme that connects all of this, the unifying idea, is evolutionary compromise and optimization.
Okay.
Natural selection almost never works on just one thing in isolation. So every social mechanism we're going to look at is basically the most efficient balance point, the evolutionary optimum between competing, often totally contradictory demands.
Like getting food versus not becoming food.
Exactly. Maximizing your food intake versus minimizing your risk of being eaten. The social strategy that evolves is the optimal balance between those two pressures. And to do that, the animal has to track what's happening in its environment at multiple levels, from this very second to across generations.
That sets the stage perfectly. So if
Okay.
we're looking for compromise, I guess the first place to start is the most foundational principle of all,
Mm-hmm.
stability. So the foundational idea here, the thing that really ties all of these social mechanisms together, is this concept that natural selection, over a long enough time, it always pushes a population towards some kind of equilibrium.
Right, a point where all the opposing pressures are balanced out. And that stable position is what we call the evolutionary optimum.
Okay, so there's a graph in the book, figure 6.1, that helps visualize this. Since we can't see it, can you just walk us through what it's showing?
Of course. So imagine a two-dimensional space, like a piece of graph paper. The axes represent variation in two different social traits, let's say. The complexity of a species mating dance is on one axis, and the intensity of that dance is on the other.
Okay, so every individual animal is a dot on that graph.
Exactly. And the whole population forms a kind of cluster of dots centered around a mode, a statistical average. Now, this is where selection comes in.
The source calls it a force field. What does that mean in practical terms?
It's a great metaphor. It means selection is constantly pushing and pulling on that cluster of dots. One pressure might be pushing for higher intensity, another might be pushing for lower complexity. The force field is the sum of all those pressures, and it pushes the center of that cluster toward one specific optimal point.
The point where the forces are perfectly balanced.
The point where they're balanced. That's the stabilizing state. And that balance point is the evolutionary compromise. The social behavior you actually see in the wild, the mating ritual, is just the outward expression, the phenotype that exists at that single point of maximum efficiency.
And that idea of compromise applies directly to how groups even form in the first place.
Right.
Right? I mean, if we're just looking at casual groups, like birds at a feeder
Or primates
Yeah.
on the move. Yeah, there's a mathematical model for that too.
Well, in the mall.
Cohen's basic model, it's pretty straightforward. It just tracks the number of groups of a certain size by balancing two things. The rate new members are attracted to a group, which is B, and the rate members just spontaneously leave, which is D.
And the really interesting stuff happens when the system hits equilibrium, when the change rate is 0.
So what's the key mathematical result here? Let's say B is 0. A group size doesn't make it any more attractive. What does the math predict?
If attraction is totally independent of size, then the distribution of group sizes should follow what's called a zero-truncated Poisson distribution.
Which means what in plain English?
It means the formation is basically random. Individuals are just joining and leaving on their own, and the group sizes you see are just the result of chance encounters. There's no social magnetism, no bigger is better effect.
If B is a positive number, if bigger groups are more attractive, maybe they offer more protection or something, then the whole picture changes.
The math flips immediately, yeah. If larger groups are magnetic, the distribution shifts to a zero-truncated binomial distribution.
So instead of being random, the data starts to pile up, showing a bias toward bigger clusters.
That's it. The bigger the attraction factor, the more the population will favor forming a few large groups instead of many small ones.
And we can actually test this with real animals. What does the data in the book show?
It shows really clear differences in strategy. So, for example, vervet monkeys have a high attraction to departure ratio.
So for them, bigger groups are definitely better.
They are, which fits that binomial distribution. They're actively seeking the benefits of being in a larger group. But then you look at baboons, and their ratios are much lower.
And what about humans?
Well, interestingly, when you look at casual human groups, people in a park or a public square, they often fit the simpler Poisson model where B is 0.
So we're acting more like independent agents in those contexts, not drawn in by the size of the crowd.
It suggests that for those temporary gatherings, it's governed more by individual movements and less by some active social magnetism based on the group's scale.
Okay, so that's temporary groups.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's move to the ultimate factor that controls long-term, stable groups. Optimization, where energy and fitness are the real currency. Can you break down the energy budget model for us?
Right, this is figure 6.2. This model is all about energy trade-offs, and it tends to predict territorial behavior. So on the graph, you have group size, N, on the horizontal axis, and energy on the vertical axis.
Simple enough.
There are two key lines. The first is the energy requirement line. It just goes up in a straight line. The more mouths you have, the more food you need. Linear.
That's the demand. What about the supply side?
That's the energy yield curve. This is the food you get from your territory. It rises really fast at first, but then, and this is the critical part, and it decelerates. It starts to flatten out.
Why does it flatten?
Because there's a ceiling. There's only so much energy you can extract from a territory you can effectively defend no matter how many members you add. You start getting diminishing returns.
So the demand line keeps going up, but the supply line levels off. The sweet spot, the optimal group size, must be where they intersect.
Exactly. The optimal size, N, is the maximum number of members that the energy yield can still sustainably support. And biologically, this model is a powerful predictor of territoriality because the whole thing is tied to the limits of a defensible area.
And the model makes a really crucial prediction about how stable the environment is.
It does. It predicts that in unpredictable, or what the book calls capricious environments, the optimal group size will actually be smaller than that maximum point.
Smaller. Why?
Because the group has to be small enough to survive the worst times, the longest periods of scarcity, not just the good times. If you optimize your size for the average year, you'll crash and burn during the really bad one.
So survival is all about weathering the low points, not just hitting the highs.
That's the logic, and it makes perfect sense. Now that's just energy. The general fitness model, which is figure 6.3, tries to wrap everything up into one big picture.
It's a postulatory graph, which means it's more of a theoretical idea.
Right. We rarely have all the data to fill it in perfectly, but it gives us the theoretical target. It plots genetic fitness against group size, and it tries to sum up all the different components of fitness defense, reproduction, foraging, disease, everything.
And the optimal group size is just the peak of that combined curve.
It's the point where the sum of all those different fitness benefits is at its absolute maximum. It's a more holistic way to think about it because life is always more than just an energy budget.
We see animals making these kinds of complex adjustments all the time, right?
Yeah.
Especially social carnivores.
Oh, absolutely. They show incredible flexibility. They're solving this optimization problem on a daily basis. The book talks about wolves, hyenas, and lions. Wolves are a perfect example. They adjust their hunting group size based entirely on how tough the prey is.
So for a caribou.
1 or 2 wolves might be fine. But if they're going after a huge, dangerous moose, they'll often need 10 or more to guarantee a successful kill without getting someone hurt. They're constantly running that cost-benefit analysis.
Calculating the energy cost of the hunt versus the energy payoff of that specific animal. We see this in insects too, but it's not driven by intelligence. It's mass communication.
The fire ant is the classic case of this kind of self-organization. A worker finds food, lays an odor trail, her nestmates follow it, and if they find food, they reinforce the trail on the way back.
The key is the communication system itself.
Right. The trail's potency and its evaporation rate control the whole process. The richer the food source, the more workers are recruited because the trail gets stronger faster. But as the food runs out, the trails naturally fade and recruitment just stops.
It's a decentralized optimization system, a chemical thermostat for recruitment.
Perfectly put. Now, the final part of this chapter looks at the most rigid form of group size, colony reproduction, and it contrasts closed human societies with these genetically hardwired insect systems.
The human example is the Mennonite communities.
Yeah, it's interesting because it shows culture working within these biological constraints. In the 1800s, these communities needed about 50 families to be viable for business, for services, and crucially, for genetic diversity. Any smaller, and they ran into problems.
But then technology changed things.
Exactly. As travel and communication got better, the minimum viable size dropped to maybe 20 or 25 families. It shows a flexible cultural optimization of group size in response to the changing environment.
Okay, now let's contrast that with the spectacular and brutal genetic programming you see in insects. Let's start with the army ant.
The army ant division is just intense. It's totally fixed. It's all triggered by the annual sexual brood, thousands of males, and maybe half a dozen new queens. The whole colony, which lives in a temporary nest, literally splits in two.
And the workers are the ones calling the shots.
So workers execute the whole ruthless process. The mother queen and the new virgin queens get carried out along separate odor trails, but the outcome is genetically locked in. Only one mother colony and one daughter colony will survive.
And what happens to the extra virgin queens?
Of the half dozen or so, only one makes it to the new daughter colony. The rest are mercilessly abandoned. The workers just seal them off, cluster around them, and leave them behind to die.
Wow.
The book calls them useless rudiments, like polar bodies in cell division. It's the ultimate, non-negotiable optimization. You ensure only one viable new colony gets started.
And the honeybees are just as complex, but it's regulated by chemistry, right? A pheromonal cascade.
Exactly. In honeybees, the division is swarming. It happens in late spring, and it's triggered by a drop in the concentration of queen substance, a pheromone from the mother queen. If the workers aren't getting enough of it, they start building these big royal cells for new queens.
And that's the signal for the old queen to go.
It is. Her abdomen shrinks, the workers get hostile, and she eventually leaves with the first, or prime, swarm.
And the swarming itself is this incredibly sophisticated multi-stage event.
Oh, it is. The swarm settles somewhere, held together by another pheromone. Then scout bees fly out to find new nest sites. They come back and advertise the direction and distance of the sites using their famous waggle dances.
So it's like a competition.
It's a democratic contest. Different scouts champion different locations, and the site that gets the most vigorous and longest-lasting dance wins. The whole colony then flies off to the chosen spot. It's a remarkable process that ensures they divide efficiently and pick the best possible new home.
Which is a perfect example of a rapid, coordinated behavioral change, which leads us right into the next chapter, how organisms actually track and respond to their environment across all these different time frames.
The central idea here is that organisms are tracking environmental changes across a whole hierarchy of timescales. Adaptation isn't just one thing, it happens on multiple complex levels, all running at the same time.
Like a biological clock tower with gears turning at different speeds.
Huh.
What are the major levels in this hierarchy?
At the very fastest end, you've got cellular responses, things like biochemical homeostasis. This is happening in seconds, keeping you stable right now.
Okay, that's the immediate stuff.
Moving up, you get organismic or behavioral responses. This is learning, hormonal shifts, even morphogenetic changes. These can happen in a fraction of a second or take up to a generation.
Then it gets slower.
Much slower. Next are the ecological changes. This is population demographics, age structures shifting, populations growing or shrinking. We're talking multiple generations now.
And at the very slowest, most fundamental level.
That's the engine itself, the evolutionary response. This is genetic change in the actual composition of genotypes in the population. You measure this in 10 or more generations. And the crucial thing is that the slower changes set the rules for the faster ones.
So a genetic shift, the slowest change, will ultimately change the parameters for how an individual learns or responds hormonally.
Precisely. It's a constant feedback loop where the deep past shapes the present's ability to react. And speaking of speed, the book makes a strong case that this evolutionary change can happen really fast.
How fast are we talking?
Well, the theory is backed up by lab evidence. There's a great example with the fruit fly, Drosophila. Researchers tracked a gene called raspberry, which affects eye color and also a specific behavior.
And under selection pressure.
Under just moderate selection, a 50% difference in reproductive rate, the frequency of that gene dropped from 50% down to about 10% in only 10 generations.
10 generations. That is remarkably fast. What does that mean for social behavior?
It means that if a selection pressure is intense enough, a new predator appears, a rapid climate shift behavioral traits, and the whole social organization can transform very, very quickly. We're not always talking about thousands of years.
Okay, so going back down that timescale hierarchy, the most drastic, immediate response an organism can have is morphogenetic change,
Yeah.
physically transforming based on a simple cue.
It's incredible. It's like a choose-your-own-body plan written into the genome. The organism just picks one of several body forms based on a single stimulus from the environment.
Like the rotifers.
The Brachionis rotifers. When they detect the chemical signature of their main predator, they immediately grow these long defensive spines. They are literally arming themselves in response to a smell.
And the predator has its own version of this.
The predator, a splancha, does too. If it senses cannibalism chemicals from its own species and gets some extra vitamin E, it grows into this gigantic cannibalistic form. It's an instant physical shift that completely changes its social and predatory behavior.
Hormones, on the other hand, are described as more of a medium-range tuning. Slower, but longer lasting.
Yeah, hormones are the coarse tuning for your motivational state. They track things like seasons, breeding cycles, or chronic stress. You can't just flip them on and off like a nerve impulse. They prime the animal for what's coming.
And their role in aggression is more complex than you'd think, especially with testosterone.
Testosterone definitely raises the baseline for aggressivity in males, no question. But its effect is often mediated by the social environment. For instance, in rhesus monkeys, the high-ranking males often have lower plasma testosterone levels than the mid-ranking ones.
Wait, that seems totally backward. I thought more testosterone meant higher status. What's the thinking there?
It really challenges that simple assumption. It raises a huge question about causality. It might be that actually achieving high status and the stability that comes with it is what dampens the hormonal system. You don't need as much hormonal fuel to maintain a position you've already won.
So the high testosterone in the mid-rankers could be a sign of their instability, constantly fighting to move up or not fall down.
That's a strong possibility. It suggests that aggression and experience can actually modulate hormone secretion rather than the hormone just being a simple on switch for the behavior.
So the nervous system provides the fine-tuning, which gets us to learning. And the book is very clear that learning is not a blank slate. It's biologically constrained.
Not a blank slate at all. Learning is a whole suite of specialized adaptations. The classic Garcia experiment with rats shows this perfectly. If you make a rat sick with x-rays after it eats something, it will only associate the sickness with the flavor of the food.
Which is super adaptive for avoiding poison.
Exactly. But if you give the rat an electric shock while it's eating, it doesn't care about the flavor. It learns to associate the pain with the size of the food pellet and the visual cues.
Which is adaptive for avoiding something that bites, like an insect.
Right. The brain is hardwired to make specific survival critical connections. The biological constraints tell it what to learn and how quickly.
And in primates, this learning is all wrapped up in the process of socialization, this gradual release of an individual into its social world.
It's a continuous process, but we usually break it down into 4 stages. First is the neonatal period, totally helpless, constant contact with the mother.
And then the transition period.
Right, where they start moving like an adult, taking their first tentative steps away. Then comes pure socialization, where play with siblings and other young animals just explodes.
And finally, the juvenile subadult period, which seems crucial.
It's absolutely crucial for their future status. This is where all those fragmented bits of play start to link up and become the serious adult behaviors, aggression, dominance, sex. It's the final rehearsal.
The role of play itself is up for debate, though. We have the structuralists versus the functionalists.
The structuralists define play by what it looks like. It's exaggerated, it's fragmented, it has no immediate purpose. The functionalists, on the other hand, define it by its ultimate function.
So for them, it's practice.
It's practice. It's all about probing and experimenting to develop and perfect the skills they'll need as adults. It's a low-stakes dress rehearsal for the high-stakes reality of adult life.
And there are some universal biological features of play. Right?
Yes, 3 main ones. Recombination, where you see adult behaviors like threat gestures mixed up in new, weird sequences. Fragmentation, where a sequence gets started but then just stops halfway through. And translocation, combining elements from totally different contexts, like mixing feeding behaviors with aggression.
And it's very age-dependent.
Very. The frequency of play shoots up, hits a peak, and then slowly declines, usually disappearing completely by the time the animal is sexually mature. The serious business takes over.
Okay, moving up from the individual, we get to the highest level of non-genetic adaptation, cultural transmission or tradition. How fixed is this in vertebrates?
It can be surprisingly rigid. The book uses mountain sheep as an example. The young rams figure out their home range by just passively following the older rams with the biggest horns.
They're just learning from the elders.
Exactly. And by the time they're about 4.5 years old, that pattern is locked in. It's their tradition, passed down without any formal teaching at all.
The most famous studies of this, though, come from the Japanese macaques. They really showed how new behaviors can spread through a group.
The troop on Koshima Island, yeah. The two classic innovations were sweet potato washing, getting the sand off in the ocean, and wheat placer mining.
Placer mining.
They'd toss sandy wheat into the water, the sand sinks, the wheat floats, and they scoop it up. Brilliant. But the key finding was about who learned these tricks.
It was the young ones.
The juveniles and infants picked it up fastest. The older adults were much, much slower to adopt these new, obviously better techniques.
Why? Are they just set in their ways?
Pretty much. They're behaviorally entrenched, their old methods work well enough, and they just don't have the exploratory drive of the young. It shows how new culture often enters a society from the bottom up. The new generation drives the change.
The book also reminds us that tool use isn't just a primate thing. It's actually pretty widespread.
It's very widespread, though the complexity varies. You have solitary wasps using a pebble to tamp down soil, or the famous Galapagos woodpecker finch using a cactus spine to probe for insects.
But a lot of this comes from just redirecting existing behaviors, right?
That's a key point. Often it's a simple redirection. The antlion throws sand at prey, but that movement is just a modification of the same motion it uses to dig its pit.
But the chimpanzees at Gombe Stream seem to be on another level entirely.
Their toolkit is incredibly rich and diverse. They make leaf sponges to drink water or wipe brains out of skulls. They use sticks to probe ant nests and then sniff them. And they use stones as hammers.
The 16-kilogram stone hammer example is amazing.
It is. Chimps in the Ivory Coast using massive stones as hammers and tree roots as anvils to crack nuts. And what's really telling is that this is a regional specialty.
Chimps elsewhere don't do it.
Right. The chimps at Gombe Stream in Tanzania didn't have this complex nut-cracking behavior. It suggests that while the basic capacity for tool use is genetic, the specific technologies are learned traditions that drift from region to region, just like human culture.
That sophisticated use of objects must shape how they interact, which is a perfect bridge into communication.
Communication is the glue for all of this, and Chapter 8 starts by breaking signals down into two basic types, discrete and graded.
So discrete signals are on or off. Simple.
Exactly. Fixed intensity, all or nothing messages, friend or foe, present or absent. A male stickleback fish's belly is either bright red or it isn't. There's no in between.
Whereas graded signals are much more nuanced.
Much richer. Their intensity or duration changes depending on the sender's motivation. Think of a rhesus monkey's stare. A low-level threat is just a stare, but as it gets more aggressive, it adds sounds, opens its mouth, moves closer. The signal grades along a scale, conveying subtle differences.
This variability, or lack of it, leads us right into information theory, which tries to quantify all this. The basic unit is the bit.
Right, the binary digit. 1 bit is just the amount of information you need to choose between two equally likely options. Yes or no?
And the simple formula for that is h equals log base 2 of n.
That works if all your messages n are equally probable. If you have 4 equally likely messages, you need 2 bits of information to know which one was sent. Uncertainty is at its maximum, so the information content is high.
But in the real world, messages are rarely equally probable. Some signals get used way more than others.
And that reduces the overall information content. We use the Shannon-Wiener formula for that. If a warning call is used 90% of the time, hearing it doesn't actually reduce your uncertainty very much because you're already expecting it.
The ultimate goal, though, is to measure the transmitted information, which means you have to account for all the noise in the system.
Exactly. Figure 816 shows this really well. You start with the total potential information from the sender, the source entropy, and the total potential information in the receiver's responses, the receiver entropy. But communication is always messy. There's noise.
2 types of noise. Let's start with equivocation.
Equivocation is uncertainty from the source's side. So a primate gives a single threat display. But that one display could trigger 3 different responses: fight, flee, or ignore. Because one signal can lead to multiple responses, the message is equivocal. It's not perfectly clear.
Okay. And the second type of noise is ambiguity.
Ambiguity is uncertainty from the receiver's side. For instance, three totally different signals, a low growl, a raised tail, a quick lunge, might all cause the exact same response: flee.
So multiple signals lead to the same outcome.
Right, which means the messages are, in a way, redundant or their effect is ambiguous.
And the transmitted information is what's left after you subtract all that noise.
It's the total potential minus the noise. And the results are often surprising. The book cites one study where the total signal entropy was almost 2 bits, but the actual transmitted information after you account for all the noise was only about 0.22 bits.
So most of the signal's potential is just lost in translation.
Lost in the messiness and redundancy of the real-world social exchange.
Given all that noise, animals have to evolve ways to enrich their signals. How do they use something like fading time with chemical signals?
Fading time is all about localization. A chemical signal needs to disappear if you want to pinpoint where it came from. This is controlled by the Q over K ratio, the amount of stuff you emit, Q, divided by the threshold concentration the receiver needs, K.
So to make a signal precise in space and time,
You evolve a lower Q over K ratio. This makes the signal fade out faster, which allows the signaler's position to be sharply located. It's absolutely critical for things like alarm calls or temporary food trails.
then there's semitectonic communication, which is fascinating. It's communication through architecture.
The message is literally built into a structure. It's petrified in sand or wax, and it lasts long after the sender is gone. A mother wasp builds her nest cells with different textures on the inside and outside walls. That texture difference tells the pupating larva which way to face to get out.
That's a message built into the wall.
Exactly. And the male ghost crab takes it even further. He builds this elaborate sand pyramid and path next to his burrow. The sight of that structure alone acts as a signal that repels other males and attracts females, even when he's not there.
Signals also vary in how specific they need to be.
Hugely. High specificity is crucial for things like courtship, to avoid mating with the wrong species. That's why moth sex pheromones can differ by just a single atom's position.
But for an alarm signal, you want the opposite.
You want low specificity. You don't need privacy for a warning. The honeybee's alarm pheromone works on its nestmates, but it also alarms any ants or termites nearby, which benefits everyone in the area.
Chapter 10 gets into the physical constraints on all this. Why are butterflies so colorful but silent, while birds are masters of sound?
It's a direct consequence of their body plan. A butterfly's delicate, lightweight body just can't support the heavy, noisy machinery you need to make loud sounds that travel long distances. So they're forced to rely on short-range chemicals or sterilized vision, like seeing in UV light.
And if chemical signals are hard to localize in air, what happens in water?
Water just changes all the rules. Diffusion is about 1,000 times slower. This means the fade-out time for a chemical signal is roughly 10,000 times greater in water.
So a signal just hangs around forever.
It's a huge problem if you need precision. Aquatic animals either have to use currents to their advantage or evolve special enzymes that actively break down and cancel the signal when they need it to disappear quickly.
The signals themselves also evolve through a process called ritualization. How does a simple movement get this complex signaling power?
Ritualization is the key. It's the evolutionary process where some movement that was functional in one context, like, say, preparing to bite, gains a secondary signaling value. And over time, selection makes it more stereotyped, more exaggerated, and simpler.
The wolf greeting ceremony is a good example.
A perfect one. It almost certainly came from the submissive begging motions of pups trying to get adults to regurgitate food. That practical act was then ritualized into a complex social signal for greeting or reconciliation among adults.
The dance flies show an incredible progression of this.
Their story is amazing. In the most primitive species, the female might just eat the male during mating, so the pressure on the male was huge.
So he started bringing her a gift.
First, he brought her a captured fly to distract her. In later species, he started wrapping the fly in silk to make it look bigger and more impressive.
And in the most advanced ones.
The original purpose is completely gone. The male just presents an empty silk balloon. The behavior has been totally transformed from a practical act of feeding into a purely symbolic, ritualized courtship display.
So, to wrap up communication, how do signals carry multiple layers of information at once? The Indigo Bunting song is the classic case study here.
It's such an elegant piece of work. The research showed that different parts of the song encode different information. Species recognition, the most basic layer, is encoded in the parts that never change, like the note structure and the frequency range.
So any indigo bunting can recognize that part. But the next layer is unique to the individual.
Right. Individual recognition is encoded in the subtle, stable details that vary from one male to the next. And finally, the motivation cue, how ready is this male to fight or mate right now, is encoded in the parts that vary within his own singing, like the length of the song and how fast he's singing it.
One song, three distinct messages.
It shows how evolution can pack specialized, multi-layered information into a single complex signal. And that complexity is amazing, but sometimes communication just breaks down into open conflict, which leads us to the next big organizing principles: aggression, space, and status.
Aggression is one of those loaded terms. How does the book define it functionally?
Functionally, aggression is just any behavior that infringes on the rights of another individual and in doing so potentially lowers its genetic fitness. And the key is to see it not as one single drive, but as a whole toolkit of specialized programs for different situations.
The source lists a bunch of different types.
Yeah, there are 8 categories: territorial, dominance, sexual, parental, moralistic, which you see in social insect sweening, anti-predatory, and predator aggression.
And a single animal can switch between these programs.
The rattlesnake is a perfect example. When 2 males fight over a female, they wrestle. They specifically do not bite each other or even rattle.
But if they're facing a different threat,
If it's a large animal that's not a predator, they coil and rattle as a warning. But if they're facing their specific predator, the king snake, they switch tactics completely. They hide their head and slap at the king snake with their coiled tail. Different context, different aggressive program.
the chapter also takes on what it calls the mortality fallacy, this idea that humans are somehow uniquely violent.
Yeah, it tries to put human violence in a proper zoological context. If you imagine a Martian zoologist watching humans for, say, 2,900 hours, which is how long George Schaller spent watching lions, they would almost certainly see no serious violence at all.
So statistically, murder is actually more common in a lot of other animals.
Far more common. The point is that human aggression is highly contingent on the situation. Its actual rate of expression is comparatively low when you look at many other mammals.
And what's controlling aggression on a moment-to-moment basis? We're back to hormones again.
Right, the hormonal system acts as that coarse tuning for mood and readiness. You have the preparedness level, set by androgens and estrogens, the quick response, that's your adrenaline, and the sustained response for chronic stress, the adrenal corticoids.
But again, we see that weird feedback loop with testosterone and status in rhesus monkeys.
We do. We already mentioned that the highest-ranking males often have lower testosterone than the mid-ranking ones who are still scrambling.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around that. If the fight for status uses testosterone as fuel, why would the winners have less of it?
It really suggests that achieving high status, or maybe just the experience of winning and being stable, is the thing that calms the system down. It might be that high testosterone is a feature of social instability and conflict, not necessarily of high rank itself. The feedback is just not a simple one-way street.
Okay, so let's move to how animals organize themselves in space. The most basic concept is individual distance.
And Leyhausen's porcupine fable just sums it up perfectly. If you huddle too close, you get pricked. If you move too far apart, you freeze to death. So they find that perfect compromise distance.
And humans have this too, but it's culturally variable.
Hugely. This is what the anthropologist Edward Hall called proxemics. He noted big differences, like the German cultural need for soundproofing and closed doors to create a private sphere, which is very different from the much closer distances tolerated in Mediterranean cultures.
Beyond that personal bubble, you have the home range versus the territory. A territory is, by definition, defended. What kind of things are worth defending?
It's incredibly diverse. It could be the food supply, like a hummingbird defending a patch of flowers. It could be a shelter, like a salamander under a rock. Or it could be access to mates, like you see in Lecking Birds, where they're defending a tiny patch of dirt that's just a display space.
And there's a mathematical scaling law that relates the size of an animal's home range to its body weight.
Yes, the formula is A equals A times W to the power of B. A is the area, W is the body weight. Biologically, what this confirms is that the size of your home range is fundamentally about your energy needs, which scale with your body weight.
And when you graph this, there's a critical difference between predators and herbivores.
A huge difference. The slope of the line, B, is much steeper for predators. This means that a predator needs a disproportionately larger territory than an herbivore of the same exact weight.
Why is that?
It's the 10% rule of ecology. Energy is lost at each step up the food chain. It takes, selection favors what's called a spatiotemporal territory. They only defend the areas they happen to be in at that moment, or they use scent posts to mark their presence. It's a way to maximize their resource control while minimizing the energy they waste on patrols.
And these territory boundaries aren't rigid. They're like an elastic disk.
That's Huxley's concept. The territory shrinks when population density goes up and there's pressure from all sides, and it expands when density goes down. But only up to a certain point, the maximum area an animal can actually use, or the minimum it needs to survive.
And within these territories, you get the dear enemy phenomenon. Why are you less aggressive to a neighbor than to a total stranger?
It's an energy-saving strategy. There are two things going on. First, simple habituation. You just get used to your neighbors. They tame each other over time.
And second,
The familiarity effect. Research has shown that just being exposed to something repeatedly makes you like it more. In survival terms, the logic is strange means dangerous. So it makes sense to save your energy for the unknown threat, not the guy next door who you already know isn't a problem.
but if crowding gets too intense and territoriality breaks down, the whole social system shifts to dominance hierarchies.
Right, like the classic peck order in chickens. It's a linear hierarchy. The dominant birds get better food, better roosting spots, and the dominant roosters do most of the mating. Higher status equals higher fitness.
And interestingly, when we selected for chickens that lay more eggs, we accidentally selected for more aggressive chickens.
Because the more aggressive, dominant hens were the ones who could secure the best resources needed to produce all those eggs. It was an unintentional side effect of the selection process.
Kin selection can even explain why an animal would voluntarily choose to be a subordinate. This is the spinster hypothesis in paper wasps.
It's a beautiful example of inclusive fitness in action. In these wasps, a female with low fertility can actually maximize her genetic legacy by helping her sister, a close relative, raise nieces.
Even though nieces are only related to her by 1/4.
Right, because the chance of her successfully raising her own daughters, related by 1/2, is very low and risky. Helping her sister is a lower risk, more reliable way to pass on at least some of her genes.
And what happens when you take a normally solitary species and force them into crowded conditions?
You see this amazing behavioral flexibility called aggressive scaling. Normally solitary, territorial animals, like some lizards or rodents when they're crowded, will shift their entire social system. They'll form complex dominance hierarchies or even a despotism,
A despotism.
where one top-ranking individual holds a core territory and just barely tolerates a bunch of subordinates living nearby. It shows how profoundly population density can dictate the rules of social organization.
Okay, that brings us to chapter 14, which makes a really sharp distinction between roles in vertebrates and castes in invertebrates.
It's a crucial distinction. Vertebrate roles, like a leader or protector, are often kind of fuzzy and problematic, because a lot of what looks like a role is actually just an individual acting selfishly, like a male protecting his own offspring.
But with invertebrate castes, it's unambiguous.
Totally unambiguous. They are morphologically and behaviorally distinct individuals that are specialized for specific tasks. An ant soldier, a termite reproductive, there's no question about their role.
To understand why these rigid castes evolve, the book introduces ergonomic theory, which basically treats the colony like a factory trying to be as efficient as possible.
Exactly. The colony as a whole is being selected to get a certain job done, building a nest, defending the queen with the minimum possible energy cost. And we can visualize this with what are called contingency curves.
These curves lead to a really strange paradoxical result about specialization. What's the paradox?
Okay, so if you have a colony with unspecialized castes generalists, a small change in the environment requires a huge evolutionary shift in the ratio of those castes to stay optimal. The system is very unstable.
But if the castes are highly specialized,
If they're highly specialized, the optimal mix is actually very stable. It becomes entrenched, and it changes very little, even with long-term environmental fluctuations.
that feels completely backward. With individual selection, we always think that generalists are better in changing environments. Why is it the opposite for colony selection?
That's the core paradox. Selection at the colony level, which is optimizing the efficiency of the whole group, favors specialization because it creates a workforce that is more stable and reliable over the long run. And the evidence backs this up. The most bizarrely specialized insect castes are found almost exclusively in the climatically stable tropics, where the optimal mix doesn't have to change much over evolutionary time.
Shifting gears to the ultimate driver of everything, sex. Chapter 15 goes back to the fundamental asymmetry of anisogamy.
Right, the basic difference between eggs and sperm. Eggs are a huge energetic investment. They are the limiting resource. Sperm are cheap and built for searching. This one difference leads to the Bateman effect. Males have a much higher variance in mating success, and it makes most animals fundamentally polygamous.
Monogamy is the exception, not the rule.
Monogamy is always a derived, secondary condition that only evolves when it's absolutely necessary for offspring to survive. The default state is polygamy.
And polygyny, where one male mates with many females, really thrives in systems like leks. The sage grouse is the ultimate example.
The sage-grouse lek is an incredible spectacle. Hundreds of males might gather to display, but the mating is extremely skewed. Only the males who manage to secure a tiny territory right in the center of the lek, the prime real estate, get to mate.
And the inequality is staggering. Something like less than 10% of the males get 75% of the copulations.
It's intense, and their display is this masterpiece of communication. The male inflates this huge air sac on his chest, erects his feathers, and does this strut where he makes a swish-swish sound, followed by this booming goo-woo that you can hear from hundreds of meters away. All of that for a tiny spot in the center.
But the book points out that sexual dimorphism, the size difference between males and females, isn't only about polygyny. There are other reasons for it.
Yes, the other major evolutionary pathway is niche division. When food is scarce or specialized, males and females can evolve different body sizes or feeding preferences to reduce competition between them.
So they're not fighting over the same food.
Exactly. It maximizes how efficiently the pair can harvest resources from their shared territory. You see this in some hawks where males and females hunt different-sized prey, and in anolis lizards, it's all about head size. The ratio of male to female head size is consistent across many species, suggesting there's an evolutionary optimum for dividing up the labor of eating.
Okay, that brings us to our last major section: care, conflict, and the dynamics between species. Chapter 16 connects parental care directly to the environment through case selection.
Right. Case selection happens in stable, predictable environments. It favors traits like a longer lifespan, reproducing multiple times, and returning to the same place to breed. All of these things together favor the evolution of parental care.
Because the goal isn't quantity, it's quality.
It's maximizing the survival of a few high-investment offspring. But even within that high-investment system, the cold, hard math of genetics guarantees conflict. And this is Traver's model of parent-offspring conflict.
And the conflict comes from their different genetic perspectives on how much care is enough.
Exactly. The parent is selected to maximize its lifetime reproductive success. That means balancing the investment in the current offspring against the cost to future offspring. The current baby, on the other hand, is only focused on maximizing the benefit to itself.
And the key is the coefficient of relationship.
That's the mathematical wedge between them. The offspring values the cost to his mother, but that cost is devalued by its relatedness to a future sibling, which is only one half. So the offspring is genetically programmed to demand more investment for a longer period of time than the parent is genetically programmed to want to give.
And if you look at the graph of this in the book,
The graph shows it perfectly. The peak benefit for the parent happens earlier, with less investment, than the peak benefit for the offspring. That gap between the two peaks is the zone of conflict, and that leads directly to things like weaning aggression. The parent starts pushing the kid away before the kid is ready to go.
this same asymmetry applies to how much siblings should help each other.
Absolutely. The parents are always selected to encourage more altruism between their offspring than the offspring are naturally willing to give. From an offspring's point of view, sacrificing for a sibling is only worth it if the benefit to the sibling is more than twice the cost to itself.
But from the mother's point of view,
She's equally related to both. So from her perspective, it's worth it if the benefit simply exceeds the cost. So the parent will always be pushing for more self-sacrifice among her children than they are inclined to provide on their own.
beyond the mother, we see other complex care systems, like alloparental care.
Right, care by non-mothers. In primates, this is often done by juvenile females, which supports the learning to mother hypothesis. They're getting valuable practice. Paternal care evolves when males are pretty certain they're the father. Male marmosets carry their twins around until the baby's combined weight equals their own. A massive investment.
Insect parental care can also be surprisingly advanced. The burying beetles are an amazing example.
Their care system is incredibly sophisticated, almost like a bird's. A mated pair finds a mouse carcass, buries it, and rolls it into a food ball. When the larvae hatch, they sit in a little crater and beg, and the mother regurgitates liquid food for them. It's essential. Without her, they can't survive.
Our final topic is the complex dynamics between species, specifically social parasitism in ants.
The evolutionary pathway usually starts with temporary parasitism. A parasite queen invades a host colony, gets adopted often by killing the host queen, and then uses the host workers to raise her own parasitic brood.
And eventually this can lead to total dependence.
Permanent inquilinism. The ultimate example is a species called Tulutomermex schneideri. This species is totally dependent on its host, and it proves Emery's rule, which states that social parasites are usually very closely related to their hosts.
And the parasite queen shows this incredible physical degeneration.
Massive degeneration. Her chemical glands are reduced, her mandibles are weak, her brain is smaller. Evolution has stripped away every single structure that is no longer needed when you're living a completely parasitic lifestyle. It's all about cost-saving optimization.
Finally, we see this incredible mix of parasitism and mutualism with giant cowbirds and orbitola birds. It all depends on the local environment.
This is a perfect final example. The cowbirds are brood parasites, but whether they are harmful or helpful depends entirely on whether there are protective wasps or bees nesting nearby.
So if there are no wasps,
If there are no wasps, the host nests are attacked by botfly larvae. In that situation, the cowbird chicks are actually mutualists. They groom their nestmates and eat the botfly larvae, which dramatically increases the host's reproductive success.
so they're parasites in one place, but helpful little delousing stations in another.
Exactly. And if the wasps are present and keeping the botflies away, then the cowbird is just a pure parasite. The host birds actually maintain a genetic mix of individuals who discriminate against cowbirds and those who don't, based entirely on this local environmental lottery. It's a beautiful example of the fluid, optimizing nature of all these interactions. So we've really mapped the internal machinery of societies. We've gone from mathematical rules on group size to the hierarchy of how animals track their world, the noisy language of communication, and the organizing forces of aggression and dominance. The essential takeaway, the insight of all these social mechanisms, is that social behavior is always an evolved solution. It's about optimizing genetic fitness under very specific and very measurable environmental constraints. It's always a search for the best possible compromise.
And that search for compromise is just inescapable. It's everywhere. We saw how parent-offspring conflict is driven by these basic mathematical asymmetries in how related they are, forcing this negotiation over care and resources. So if even the strongest family bonds in nature are subject to this kind of harsh, quantifiable negotiation, what fundamental biological conflicts might be subtly shaping the structure of our own seemingly unique human relationships? Go explore that thought. Where are you optimizing for yourself and where are you compromising for your group?
We really hope this deep dive into these social mechanisms has given you a fresh perspective on the profound evolutionary pressures that are shaping every single social interaction, from the hive all the way up to the troop.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the evolutionary math of life, from ants to apes. We really appreciate you tuning in. Good night from the Last Minute Lecture team.